Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. My name is Ophir. I'm the CEO of SenseIP. And before we'll start with the intro, we would like to launch a 1-minute poll of what brings you here today. So if you may take the time and share with us so that we can learn a little bit more about you. Okay, I think that would be a great start. Today's session is mostly a format is Q&A, so feel free to drop questions in the QA at any point. And I think we're gonna kick it off now. As I mentioned, my name is Ophir. I'm the co-founder and CEO of SenseIP, and we have the privilege to host with us Tye from Creativity Coach. Tye.
Beautiful. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. So, can you introduce yourself shortly?
So again, my name is Tye Glover. I've been, my space started within the, geez, I drew a blank that quickly, but I've always been in supply chain space. I've always started out of college and going in and got my MBA, started working for a real early startup, Manugistics, way back in the day. And that's really where I started noticing processes that are playing out because, again, I was working in applications. So that was kind of the start of my background. And, I slowly began to move into the space where I'm talking to you today as an ideation coach.
That's great. And I think what got me excited about today is that we are basically handing two sides of the same equation. People need the guidance and your support and tools to help them start the process and get into the inventive mode, if you will, the mental process, which we'll talk about. And at that point, they will need the guidance to move on and make sure that they walk the right path. So I think those two approaches complement each other. I would like to start by asking you, you describe creativity as a mental process before physical execution. So can you unpack what that means?
So I think a lot of people don't really recognize the fact that everything that's been created, everything we see, whether it's a car or a pencil, was created first in someone's mind. And then it had to be moved through the physical process of whether you're picking up tools and building something or whatever it is, writing code. But all creation begins first in someone's mind and it's brought forward through into the physical form. You can even look at athletes or artists. We all work the same way. It starts first within the mind.
That's great. And obviously, you started studying creativity because you were drawn to that. What was the moment when you realized that professionals do need a different approach?
I've always been a creator, like I said, and it wasn't until I started to recognize the fact that when I look back at all my ideas, I recognize the individual inputs, the thoughts or the understandings, or maybe the trainings that I went through that brought me to understanding what I knew today, meaning connecting that ultimate dot. So when I looked at all the different programs that were out there, the design thinking, the open innovation and so forth, they were all methodologies and frameworks that would help the organization from the standpoint of executing or collaborating. But I recognized that the way I was putting things together, it was more of the individualistic aspect of how we mentally create. And you have to first be able to mentally understand the process of creation before you can work collaboratively. I think it's the beginning of the process.
Yeah. Well, you often talk about reality boxes. What are they and
Right.
how do they shape the way we approach challenges?
Yeah, so if you can think about it the way of reality box is, it's basically our mental framework and understanding of our reality. It's what we know, it's a positive sides of us, whether we're left or right or whatever it is. We've learned certain things through moving through our life to where we are. And we've learned in different wavelength and patterns, especially early on in our lives. And the problem with it is that we don't have an understanding really of what assumptions are right, what assumptions are wrong, what falsehoods we're moving forward, because we connect different assumptions to other assumptions through inferences. And the reality boxes are the structures, or at least all the understandings and framework that keep us where we are. But the challenge with it is that they don't enable our view outside of the box. They block what we can know and we can perceive. And as a result of that, if you're trying to be a truly creative person living within that box, the box has to collapse first before you can start perceiving beyond what you're used to knowing and understanding. That's kind of like the importance of the box and recognizing how they really limit your possibilities. And then you can look back and you can see how they play out from the deepest parts of antiquity all the way through to the Christian era and an age of logic and reasoning, where we're not able to move again beyond what we know and understand and be open enough to perceive differently and recognize the fact that things exist outside of those boundaries.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned that it's all based on experience collection and perception. This is where the methods begin. But for nowadays busy professionals to start collecting experience more intentionally, what can they do in that area?
I think to your point, I kind of see things as being thought fragments. And we can look back at the proverbial Steve Jobs quote about you can't connect the dots. Those dots were experiences where he asked certain question of what he was seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, or touching, and he had certain observations, and he even would answer questions that he would ask by filling in the gaps with his own understandings of how he would have done it. And so those are those thought fragments that we collect as we have these observations throughout the course of our lives. And we're able to pull them back when we go through challenges where we need resolutions simply by asking the right questions of those experiences.
Oh, that's great. And talking about Steve Jobs and the connected dots and looking backwards, how do you help people build trust in that backward-looking process? It's not very intuitive.
It comes into a again, most of what I deal with is mental, it's mindset. And so I work with an ancient set of laws that exist, they're pre-Diluvian, for example. And the understandings have been woven through all faith systems, at least on this side of the Mediterranean, or on that side of the Mediterranean, that is. And they've allowed the different cultures to grab that animist understanding of, they're part of the universe, but yet also adopt understandings that you're seeing played out in Stoicism and, the words that were spoken by Marcus Aurelius with, if you choose not to be harmed, then you won't feel harmed. And if you don't feel harmed, then you haven't been. These are all mental processes that come from the same structure of laws. And I think when we try to move and create ideas without recognizing that we must have had an experience first in the past with an understanding of one thing and then an understanding of another to be able to have the fragments necessary to put them together to create that idea. You can't make a cheeseburger without the cheese, the hamburger meat, and the bun. You need those raw materials, and those fragments of understanding are those raw materials.
Yeah, and you mentioned emphasize actually the pattern recognition here. So can you walk through an example where connecting the patterns in past experiences helped solve a current challenge?
So, if we can look at, for example, our experiences, where we are today, then there are either known experiences where we've done things we've recognized consciously, we brought them in, but there are also unknown patterns. There are things that exist outside of what we've ever could conceive and have ever experienced. And those unknown patterns, or rather that unknown part of our experience, is where the anomalies exist that could represent a detail of an understanding or of that fragment that could be later used to solve problems. So if you're not grabbing these raw materials again through from the detecting the anomalies that are occurring, we all move through our lives, but how many of us will actually reach into the details of something and notice something in more detail, give more energy to it? Or as was spoken, observe the obvious and ask obvious questions. Because if you look throughout some of the greatest creators, including Da Vinci was really sharp on the detail that he would add into his paintings because he would literally sit and observe the detail of the wrinkles of a face and the lines. And so when you're so attuned into observing the details and you're naturally collecting those raw materials. And if you consider in the fact that we perceive and understand our experience in patterns, then it only makes it logical that the patterns are what we are experiencing. And we want to look for the anomalies of what we're used to, because that's where the raw materials exist.
Great. I'm taking a question from the audience here. How
Mhm.
do you get inspired or get in creative state, especially to expand beyond your reality boxes?
Mhm. I look for the challenges. I look for the challenges that I experience in life because it seems as if there's only two types of challenges. There's the ones that are positive ones that can propel us forward, but there's also the negative ones that we're dealing with. For example, my divorce, where I had to potentially sell my home and everything was falling around me. And from that observation and recognizing my home needed a lot of work, and flippers were calling me every day. I'm like, why don't I flip my home? And then I started moving into contacting a flipper about, well, why don't I get someone to come and flip my home? But instead of me selling me my home, we share the profit. So I keep my home. Once I sell my home, he gets his profit back. He's making more money because he's not having to buy the home. I'm making more money. So we're solving problems with that we have, the challenges that we have by looking at all the raw materials of our life's experiences, the things that either bad or good, nothing is wasted unless you waste it. But we look for things that can help us to solve those problems. And the only place we can look is backwards.
That's great. And maybe that ties to the next question here from attendees. How does someone know when their perception is limited by a box they cannot see yet?
Great question. How do you know if your perception is limited by the box? Well, first of all, we all live in those boxes. One thing I would recognize and do is I would put myself into a one or two, or rather, two or three person position where I'm sitting here and I'm understanding and listening to everything that's happening, what's going on. But I'm also sitting right here beside myself and watching me, watching first person and watching how first person is handling and listening to what they're hearing, and maybe getting tense or maybe getting emotional or having a problem with it. And then in that second position, you should be observing and trying to figure out, well, what's the first position's problems? And so by recognizing the fact that what your problem is, first position may be biased in some way, shape, or form, then you can become aware of the boxes, the structure of the boxes. And at a minimum, you can not allow it to affect you going forward. At least you're aware of it, but you can also choose not to be harmed, not to be affected.
Yeah, and I would add to that, we mentioned Steve Jobs. He was known for his reality distortion effect. I would say that the real entrepreneurs are not discouraged by trying to break the boxes they're in. So never take things for granted.
Yeah.
Always assume that there's a box and always try to break through and find a different box.
Yeah.
Um,
What's interesting about that is that where we live in a structure where even our US code says, I was thinking about the fact that, I think I lost that train, so we can move on. But it was an important point about how we're structured, and we don't even, to your point, know the box exists. Oh, here it was. We talk about randomness and we talk about chaos theory and the fact that we can't break through those because they are what they are. But yet, if you look at cause and effect, the law of effect, for every cause, there is an effect. The failure to notice the effect and to notice the consequences of an action does not say that action does not exist. So within even the realm of chaos theory, there is order within that realm. We just don't have the ability to perceive it yet, but we should always continue to look for it.
that's very important. Um, I think you said that nothing comes from nothing. So, what are some practical ways people can build a raw material needed for creative thinking?
Yeah, so again, it's one of the biggest things, most important aspect is to observe the obvious, within our regular life. Whatever you're going through, whatever you may be dealing with, maybe it's dealing with spreadsheets, with making dinner, whatever it is, observe the obvious things about that experience and then start looking into the details of any one of those different pieces and start asking questions about those details. Because if you can understand and again grasp the concept of everything works according to a process, then you will start to notice the processes that are playing out. Maybe it's across a period of time or whatever, but you'll start noticing processes that you've never noticed before. And then you'll start to get the understanding, the greater understanding of how things are actually working. And then those will become more applicable in other spaces within your life. So observe the obvious and ask obvious questions.
That's great. And another question from the audience. I feel like breaking through boxes can take some kind of emotional resilience or bandwidth. Does that make sense? What's the best way to harness that? That's
You
a
know, it's a very important point because, again, it's about consciousness, it's about recognizing and understanding. But one thing that I always do and recognize within my life is that mental energy is so important and I don't waste it, which means I don't spend a lot of time, I don't do video games, I don't do a lot of things that take mental energy that don't add value to my life. Because if you can recognize that we have about 2,100 calories that we consume every day, and out of that 2,100 calories, about 400 of those calories are going towards thought alone. Creative thought rather, burns more calories than the wasted time of idle thought and twirling on our phone. And so, with that finite amount of energy that I have per day, I have to extend it towards developing myself further. So, really focus and mindset is the key towards separating ourselves from the challenges that are holding us back. But also, one last thing, again, recognizing that when you start to understand the existence of those reality boxes around you, then you can also start to free yourself from the energy that you used to use thinking and considering those things in the false way. And so that's a huge release on energy right there that you, again, can be directed towards creativity.
Oh, that's right. And from my point of view as entrepreneur, yeah, you need to be emotional resilience. You will have difficulties. You will have people that will just pray for you to fail. Um, you need that, thick skin. And yeah, it takes a toll, but try to separate between your work challenge and your other life, maybe. Um, Never be discouraged from inventing, from moving forward, from
Yeah.
readjusting reality to your needs to some extent. I think that's the basic of entrepreneurship.
Right. And
Um,
I'd also say, it's you also have to recognize a concept that my wife and I had to recognize a while ago is a concept known as more near than before, because things take time, and as much as you may want to move that ball forward, it's only going to move when it's ready to move. So, in recognizing more near than before, if you can push it forward, just even the thought associated with what you need to do every day, every minute, or every hour, whatever, you will move that ball forward and you will be able to build what you're trying to build.
oh yeah. And I would add one more thing, and this is with my sales hat on for a sec. Um, the process or the journey, once you started going down a path, shouldn't necessarily be that hard or frustrating. I mean, if you take the first step correctly, you can reduce so much stress and effort and make things better for you and more smooth. You just need to know how to do that. And we might talk about that later and how SenseIP can help with that. We are talking about creativity, and immediately when people think about creativity, they think about artists, designers, but how can someone in fields like sales or finance, product, medicine, how can they apply that same mindset?
When you go back to recognizing that everything that's created is created within the mind, then you can also recognize that it applies to everyone in whatever space where they're thinking and where they're creating solutions to challenges that they're facing. So, for example, the salesman might be looking and noticing certain challenges that they may be having in certain spaces, and therefore recognize opportunities that exist. I think it was one of my a guy who I really admire greatly, Dean Keenan, I believe you pronounce his last name. He was a gentleman that invented Segway. And so he was a person that created his opportunity just by not necessarily wanting to do anything or to build anything, but his brother had a need, and his brother wanted to be able to build medical because he was a surgeon. And so here he comes upon his brother and he's getting involved in that. And through getting involved in building those medical devices for his brother, he developed a whole skill set and understanding, but he also created solutions that we had never seen before.
Well, we have a few questions here that I'll try to combine together from the audience. It's basically about, teams today, they face pressure to deliver quickly. Creativity can feel like a luxury. How do you coach people to stay creative under constraint, and specifically an organization that prides efficiency? How can the leaders carve out the space for creative exploration without slowing the process?
That's a difficult challenge because of course if you're tied up and thinking so much about the actual thing that I need to bring to the world, then how do you actually extend that energy towards the different fragments that are needed to build it, you know? I would say it's really more so being able to shift your mindset and place it into a mindset, separate your time, for example. You can't be always on, which means you need to isolate a certain amount of time to deal with a certain problem. But you'll also notice that as you're moving through with those particular periods that you do set aside, you will be pulling fragments from understandings that you've captured in prior days or maybe in the shower or whatever, because while you're not necessarily automatically trying to think about those things, if you have a challenge in your mind will naturally go towards solutionizing that challenge, even in a subconscious way. And so you may be finding those little things that could fit that particular challenge, even without looking for them.
That's great. We have, again, I'll try to combine two questions here. People ask about how can you create space to safely explore ideas that seem unrealistic or risky, and at the same time, how do you use generative AI to support creativity? Um, I actually want to answer that. Um, the world of AI actually uh, offers us so much power and so many capabilities that we never had before. And one of them is to bounce ideas fast and quickly and do the simulation and try to estimate what will be the impact. It actually provides, if it's managed correctly, that safe space where you can explore ideas and check with their validity. Now, granted, if you'll go to ChatGPT and try run your ideas, you are at risk. One of the most important things is to make sure that if you have an idea, you keep it to yourself to some extent so that you are in control of who you share that with and to what extent. Again, SenseIP, we have the platform to allow that. This is exactly the reason we wanted to generate or create that platform to allow every person out there, regardless of his background or his profession, or his education, if they have idea, even a slight idea, a high level one sentence, that's enough. You can come with that idea to our platform, share that with our AI agent, and start exploring that, break it down to the concept, ensure that those concepts are indeed unique. I mean, there's no real need to develop things that already exist. So the ability to analyze it and tell you, hey, this concept, there's already something really close to it. Let's try to find a different take on it, a different angle, something that will make it unique. So at one phase, at one swipe, you can not only understand better your idea, you can understand what you're fighting against, and going back to the anxiousness of not knowing, cannot see how the dots will connect. This is a great way, I believe, to connect them all together and see the bigger picture before you actually spend the time and resources in chasing down your dream and idea.
Yeah, I would say that also, if you look at computing logic itself, it was created by, conceived by a gentleman by the name of George Boole, who again, who used those same laws of reality to develop the understanding of the if then statements and so forth. So, it's it. AI works so perfectly because it does replicate the human process of thought, and therefore it's a multiplier because you can use so much more data within your AI to develop so far outside of the bounds as compared to what you would normally be able to do just as an individual sitting at home watching TV or using your computer.
That's right. And from a technical perspective, I would add AI is probably the biggest revolution we had in so many years. Every generation we think, oh, industrial revolution or the internet revolution, internet 2.0. Well, AI changes things dramatically. I'm not sure that we know to what extent,
Almost,
what will be the impact.
yeah. If
With
you look
great
at
powers, yeah, sorry.
now Sapien, I mean, I forget the gentleman's name. You're all
Yuval Noah Harari.
right. Who mentioned if you got on a boat or ship in 600 AD and you got off it in 12 or 13, you wouldn't necessarily notice a shift in technology that much. AI is that shift in technology, and it's going to be, we may not necessarily see or be able to perceive the full impact, but this is one of those huge monumental shifts in humans, for humans itself.
Yeah, I think it's not just shift in technology, it's the shift in the way we live our lives. I mean,
True.
the powers of the AI combined with more and more robotics and automation leaves us as human beings in a strange situation where there are computers and devices that can do better, faster, cheaper, more affordable.
Right.
What we as people excel in
Mhm.
is our creative thinking,
Mhm.
our ideation, being able to come up with idea that is not just a combination of huge database that the AI has, but something completely out of the box.
Mhm.
Think about so many inventions during or over the lifespan of the humanity. We build all these things just from our crazy ideas. So, in my
But
take, yeah,
let me challenge you.
please.
That box you're talking about, we create all these different ideas. And again, I would argue we had to have an experience with that before we can have those raw materials. But wouldn't you say AI also has to have those raw materials? It's more important, though, the questions that are asked of those raw materials to be able to hone it in the direction you're trying to go.
Oh, that's interesting. Um, some inventions are
Mhm.
basically a natural progress of combining things that are out there. There was a need, or someone absorbed that, hey, I need something to, or I have a problem, I need to solve it. And oh, I can solve it by having this plus that plus. So a lot of things are creative, are to some extent unique, but they don't have the inventive step. They don't have something new completely. It's creativity and it's valid. It's important, but you have more competition there. I mean, what really makes me wake up excited about the day
Yeah.
is to see what strange and bizarre and completely out of the box ideas people came up with. And granted, some of them, if not most of them, will find their way to the trash can eventually
Mhm.
because it's not realistic, because it's not usable, because there's no real market demand.
Right.
But some
Mhm.
of them will change the world completely.
Right. Right. Most definitely. Hmm.
So we don't have much time. Let me ask you one last question. If someone walks away from today wanting to strengthen their creative process, what is the one thing they should start doing tomorrow?
And it's going to go back to that same statement of start to observe the obvious things around you. Again, I will make that argument that you have to have had an experience with a particular thing before you can incorporate that particular thing into your lift of anything you want to create. So, identifying those things and start observing them, looking at them, watching them over time. There's many spectrums of how we can observe. We observe sensorially via smell, taste, touch. And so, but leaning into them and then start asking questions about why that taste is or what it does or whatever the space is. Lean into those things and you will capture more raw materials for your ideas. And then the question is, what questions will you have of the challenges that you face? Because that's what the binding point is, brings it all together.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, this is the whole engineering question. Basically, you observe something, you understand the need, you
Mhm.
come up with theory, we try to solve it. If it
Mhm.
works, great. If not, move to the next thing. I
Yeah.
like that.
But that thing is still available for something else, for another idea later on. Nothing is wasted.
Definitely. So we definitely thank you all for participating in this session, and thank you, Ty. Um, a recording will be available later on with certificates. And if you want to start your ideation, your inventorship journey correctly, please hop into SenseIP.ai website as well, and we will welcome you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.